Welcome to Let's Talk Surrogacy, a podcast about the people, experiences, and decisions that shape the surrogacy journey. Today, I have a very special guest, Wade Morris, Director of Community Resources at American Surrogacy. Wade, just tell me a little bit about what you do here.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Lindsay. My name's Wade Morris. I work at American Surrogacy. I am the Director of Community Resources. And what that means is I educate families that are looking at our agency, answer their questions, prepare them for the process, and really help them join our agency initially.
Wonderful.
Now, my background has been in building families for over 30 years. I did work at American Adoptions, and they moved me over to American Surrogacy about 10 years ago. So I've been helping create families through surrogacy.
So a lot of people have heard about surrogacy, but they don't really know how it works. Can you kind of give me a little detailed background of how that all pans out?
Yeah, sure. You know, by the time families are starting to look at compensated gestational surrogacy, they really have tried to exhaust all the other avenues to build our family, like through IVF. What surrogacy is able to do is provide families a genetic connection to the child. Now, some families have 100% genetic connection to the child. Other families may only have half of a genetic connection because maybe they needed to utilize a sperm donor or an egg donor. Other families that go through this, they have to also have just an egg donor and a sperm donor, and they have no genetic connection to the child. And then you do have families that do embryo donation. So there are many ways that a family can succeed through surrogacy with those avenues.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can remember, many years ago that surrogacy was typically like reserved for, you didn't have IVF and you literally were having genetic makeup of two separate people. And I just think it's amazing now in today's day and age that we can use your own genetic makeup to create a baby.
Oh my gosh, yes. And, back in the beginning days of surrogacy, they did a lot of what's called traditional surrogacy, which meant that they utilized the surrogate's egg and then the man's sperm, whereas the surrogate was 50% genetically connected to that child.
Right.
But they just don't do that process anymore. So really the surrogate herself is just the carrier of the baby and has no genetic connection to the child. And so that's how it's been going on for a while.
Well, and I can imagine that probably saves a lot of legality and issues because speaking as a woman and a mother, imagining carrying a child that was half mine and then just giving it up, it's the same as adoption, that's a pretty challenging thing to do while very unselfish.
Oh, absolutely. And, they were having issues with like child custody, termination of parental rights. It just got a little sticky in there. And so they really kind of changed all of that over the years. And now it's just called compensated gestational surrogacy.
You're just the carrier.
You're just the carrier.
Surrogacy, I'm sure, can feel like a very overwhelming process. Where does one begin? What's the first step?
The first step, what I educate families on is really you have to have an IVF clinic, fertility clinic to really succeed in surrogacy. So I feel like that's the first step that a family really needs to start to do their research. Looking around for good fertility clinics around them and really doing 2 to 3 consultations with fertility clinics. I always educate families. One of the best things to do before you start doing consultations with clinics is you want to sit down, be organized, write out your 10 to 15 questions that you want to ask each clinic. And therefore, when you're doing these consultations, you're very organized. you get the same you get the same questions answered, and then by the end of those consultations, you're going to have a really good idea of what kind of clinic you like. And some families do 3 or 4, but some other families may do just one with a clinic and really like them. So it's different in each way. And some of the questions I always tell families that would be good on their list is, what's their availability? Are they really busy? Can they meet with me soon? Or are they looking at 2 to 3 months down the road? How do they create the embryos? Can they choose a gender of the embryo? Cost. What's that process look like? When do I pay? What are their success rates when it comes to embryo transfers? So those are just some, but obviously families are going to have their own unique questions based on their own situation. But that's what I kind of educate families at the beginning.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned all that, because I was sitting there thinking, like, as a complete newbie or a person that knew nothing about surrogacy, I think having a set list of questions or something that or guidelines to be able to ask each clinic. And I would think that doing your due diligence and checking numerous surrogacy companies would be ideal.
Yeah. And honestly, some families don't even find a clinic they like in their own location. They go and look in other states. There's some really big clinics out there that do a very, very good job. And I always tell them this too, is if they needed an egg donor or a sperm donor, I first would talk to the fertility clinic doctor about this, because some fertility clinics, they may have their own egg or sperm donor list, and that they can, work with. Mm-hmm. Other clinics may have a good relationship with a sperm or egg donor bank that maybe they can piggyback on that relationship that they had a good experience with. And so I always tell families, probably the clinic is number 1, and then going after the egg or sperm donor is number 2 if you need that.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that will be very helpful to people who are potentially looking into surrogacy. What is an agency's role, and what separates a good agency from a bad agency?
Yeah. Agencies, they're all different. I mean, when you start doing research on surrogacy agencies, you're going onto the internet. It is super overwhelming because everybody operates differently. Agencies' fee structures are all different. So, until you get on the phone or do Zoom calls with an agency like ourselves, it's very, very confusing, and it really is confusing on, where to start. Now, I really think, some of the most important factors in looking for a good agency, number 1 is making sure that they are fully screening their surrogates before they match them with intended parents. Number 2 is the amount of marketing and advertising outreach the agency has, because when you can get a lot of surrogate leads, it really does lower your wait times. And then 3rd, I believe having a balanced ratio of families to surrogates on their list is also important, because it does equal lower wait times as well. So those are really the 3 most important things that a family should be looking at as they do their due diligence.
So when you say wait time and family to surrogate ratio, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So if you look at certain agencies out there, they over sign up families. They may have 500 families on their list, 600. I know agencies that have 700 families on their list. Well, what happens with that, if you typically take a 10-to-2 ratio, which means they have 10 intended parents to 2 surrogates, you work with an agency like that, you literally are going to be waiting 2 to 3 to 4 years to just have a baby. And really 2 years to get into a match. And then it's going to be another 14 to 20 months after that to have the baby. So that type of agency has a bad ratio, which means longer wait times. When you're able to carry a 1-to-1 ratio like American Surrogacy, we don't oversign up families. We do a very good job of managing that list, making sure that we do have an available surrogate for every family on our list.
Wow. That sounds like, why would you choose any other agency, to be quite honest, And I've also heard that you have to keep paying as an intended parent, that let's say you match and then that doesn't work out, or it doesn't, like they're screening early, like they're signing you up and then they're not able to match you. So you sit there for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and really, when you start diving into some of these agencies' contracts, you're going to learn that maybe their contract is only valid for 2 years.
Right.
Well, and if they're not in a match or a situation by then yeah, they may have to come up with more additional funds to keep that case going with that agency.
Right. Or let's say they initially match you with someone, but they haven't been screened properly. So you get your hopes up thinking, oh my gosh, this is our surrogate. Then they go through that whole process and they're not even a qualified surrogate.
Yeah, that is the devil in the details for sure.
Yeah.
And you do see a lot of agencies out there that do very minimal screening, maybe a social assessment, maybe a preliminary interview with the surrogate, but then they rely on the clinic itself to do the rest of that screening. And, it costs the family time, money, because there's a high likelihood that she will get denied at your clinic. Because honestly, with our research and data, out of every 100 women that want to be somebody's surrogate, maybe 2 qualify. So a lot of these agencies don't spend that time, money, and energy to do all of that. They rely on the clinic to find that 2 out of 100. But at American Surrogacy, which I can kind of explain how we screen our surrogates, we try to find that 2 out of 100 before we match her.
Boy, because it kind of sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that a lot of other agencies are kind of scammy, that they're giving you false hope that you're going to have this baby super, super quick. And the reality is they haven't done their due diligence. They haven't done the proper screening. And it's a matter of just getting money right out of the gate only to sit and wait.
Yeah, and the family doesn't know what the family doesn't know.
Right.
So unless you get somebody on the phone or a Zoom call with somebody like me that really educates families on the screening, our marketing and advertising outreach, and also that balance ratio, they're just out there trying to navigate these waters on their own, and it's really hard.
Yeah, and I would imagine that with that, there's a lot of probably fraud and things that go on in this industry, that it sounds like American Surrogacy is definitely on the up and up.
Absolutely. We take the time, and honestly, these women that are going through the screening process, it takes them about 3 months to get through our screening. So they're very compassionate and they're very motivated and really want to help families, be a family. And so we do spend that time, money, and energy to figure out who that 2 out of 100 is before we match, because then it just continues to gain momentum at the clinic level. And then from there, they're off to their journey.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you talk about different agencies and maybe the programs that they may have that all differ?
Yeah, there's different types of agencies for sure out there. I kind of break it down into about 3 of them. The first one is the mom and pop agencies. These are agencies that have past surrogates or past intended parents that own these agencies and run them. Well, they've got a big heart. They've got a lot of passion. However, with these agencies, they're lacking professional assessments, professional services, and they usually only work in about 1 or 2 states. A second type of agency that exists out there is either a medical facility or a legal law firm. I know some places that do all of these things, but what they're lacking is they're really good at their they're usually good at the one thing that they do, like either medical or legal, but they have a hard time doing all the services that you need to have a successful journey from start to finish. And then the third type is the professional agencies. I can really only think of about 8 to 10 of these in the United States. These are the ones that have proper staff with the educational credentials, like social workers.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
Can you explain to me what you mean by proper staff?
Yeah, proper staff is having the proper educational credentials to be able to do, case assessments, full case management, support and education. There's a lot of administrative things that happen there as well. And so you see about 8 to 10 of these, and they usually work nationwide as well. And American Surrogacy is one of those agencies.
Now that we've covered the basics, let's talk about American Surrogacy and its origin and its approach.
Yeah, so when we were developing our 3 programs, we wanted to meet the need of the client. And so every family has their own needs. And so we wanted to develop that and make sure we met their needs based on, what type of journey they're looking for.
Right. Sounds like very tailored to the customer's experience.
Yes, absolutely. One of them was the independent program, which is where the intended parents locate their own surrogate, whether that be a family member or a friend or, somebody they find on social media. Then we had 2 full service programs. One of them is called the Limited Risk Program, which does offer financial protection, a very predictable and protective fee structure. Whereas the other program is the Foundation Program, which is really how most surrogacy agencies operate out there, where they just give you this big fee variable range, and you just pay as you go along the way. And so we felt like those 3 programs would really, allow us to help really any family in any one of their types of situations that they're looking for.
Sure. And I would imagine there's financial levels to each one of those programs. And I would feel like there potentially could be a lot of risk if you're choosing an agency that maybe is just always this fee for service versus like an umbrellaed kind of, hey, look, we're going to cover all these costs regardless of what they are. If the surrogate starts to have medical issues, then you would cover those costs, and that factors into the amount that they pay.
Yeah, somewhat, yes. In the limited risk program, the good thing about that program is it does provide a peace of mind to the family, because unfortunately, in the surrogacy world out there just could be some financial pitfalls that happen to families along the way.
Sure.
Sometimes it never happens to families, sometimes it does, and you don't really know who it's going to happen to because it could happen throughout the journey. And that's where that limited risk program really allows us to, if there's disruptions or things that we have to provide services again, that's where that program really protects you. The foundation program, it does have a lower starting cost, but it has no financial protection.
Right.
But, families, they like that type of program because they feel like they could get a lower cost surrogacy journey. But, if they have financial pitfalls that could happen, it does increase that cost because their families are going to come out of pocket again for repeat services
Sure.
and repeat steps. And so, families, that's why they like that peace of mind. And so
Yeah.
I feel like the limited risk program is a really popular program.
I feel like that's almost like a no-brainer, and yet maybe you could give me some examples of things that have happened. Like what are some of those pitfalls that you're talking about?
Yeah, the pitfalls that happen sometimes, really at the clinic level is, because we do all of our thorough screening, there is a small chance that the clinic could deny her. Therefore, we would have to rematch that family. Now, in both programs, we do unlimited matching. So it never costs the family additional money to get into a new match. So that would be a little pitfall at that stage. But honestly, 95% of the time, they will get approved at the clinic with our surrogates because we did that screening. Other times, families and surrogates, trying to think of other pitfalls that could occur. Along the way, surrogates, because it's such a long journey, they could have personal matters come up in this journey. You know, they could have, you know, I hate to say this, but maybe a death in the family, or, you know, maybe the surrogate is maybe having some personal issues like, you know, marital problems, and maybe doesn't want to move forward or can't move forward based on her situation. And obviously this happens before she does become pregnant. But that does happen from time to time because it is a long journey.
Sure.
And so in that scenario, that could be a disruption for the family, and then we would have to start from square one to go through all those steps again to get that surrogate to that same spot.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
American Surrogacy matches intended parents with surrogates in around 1 to 4 months. How does that differ from other agencies, and what exactly are you doing to speed that up?
Yeah, so you are correct. American Surrogacy does match in 1 to 4 months. Really, a lot of it goes back to 3 things, really. You know, marketing and advertising outreach. It is so important to get as many surrogate leads as possible, because as I was saying, is only about 2 out of 100 pass the screening. So we have to screen a tremendous amount of surrogates to get our wait times that low into 1 to 4 months. So marketing and advertising outreach is so important. And even like with us, you know, our affiliates have media platforms that we go out and locate surrogates, like for example, surrogate.com, americansurrogacy.com, howtobeasurrogatemother.com, gestationalsurrogacy.com, and also surrogacyagencies.com. So with us, we typically get 4 to 5 times the amount of leads that most other agencies don't.
Interesting. And I could imagine, I mean, obviously, the more options someone has, the better they are, or more likely that they'll actually get a match.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll find exactly what they're looking for in a surrogate, because we have such a wide range coming through our screening we find that perfect fit for that family, and also the surrogate too. The surrogate's very, very important in this process, and she has things that she's looking for in a family as well.
I was just going to ask, have you found that surrogates have a pretty strict criteria of what kind of family they would like to serve?
You know, and not necessarily strict is probably not the right word, but they do have criteria. You know, maybe they're
give me an example.
Maybe they're open to same-sex couples. You know, maybe they're looking for helping a family out in a different part of the country. You know, maybe she wants to help a family that lives in the mountains or by the ocean. You know, maybe she would like to help a family that has 1 or 2 children already, that the child will be a sibling. Or maybe she's looking for a family that has no children. Maybe age groups is important to her, and helping a family that's in a certain age range. But strict is probably a little too strong a word. But yeah, they always are looking for things, and they're all different in different ways.
Well, sure, because I've interviewed several surrogates, and both of them had pretty specific desires and needs with each intended parent that they were looking for. And so I think it's just as important for what the surrogate may want as the intended parent. Like, as you said, it has to be that perfect match.
It's a two-way highway.
Yeah.
It's 100% voluntary on both sides. And you find that, you know, internally, this is why an agency like us with social workers that are helping with the case management, you know, matching algorithms, you know, making sure that they're presenting profiles to the right families and the right surrogates based on what they're looking for.
Sure.
So therefore, a lot of times, you know, families, you know, look at maybe the first 1 or 2 surrogates and they really like them and they want to go to the next level.
Some agencies match surrogates before they've gone through proper screening. Can you explain how American Surrogacy does things differently?
Yes. Yeah, so when a surrogate first contacts us, you know, she fills out self-disclosed medical and social information forms. So the very first thing we do, and we follow the ASRM guidelines when we do this preliminary review. ASRM guidelines, fertility doctors have come up with these guidelines. And so if we don't follow these guidelines, then they're going to get denied at the clinic. So what we do is we do that preliminary screening following the ASRM guidelines. Then we will do a social assessment with her. And those are usually interviews with the surrogate, her support system, just to make sure everybody's on the same page on that other end. Then we do very detailed criminal background checks and civil checks on them and anybody above 18 in the home. Then we have a third party review her health insurance so we understand exactly what we need to do as an agency. Then we have a labor and delivery nurse review her past pregnancy records to make sure there's no underlying concerns.
Because in order to be a surrogate, you have to have had a child of your own.
That is correct. That is an ASRM guideline. So like, for example, she cannot be on state assistance. She cannot be on Medicaid. She's had to have successful pregnancies in the past with little to no complications. So there's a laundry list that fertility doctors follow when it comes to ASRM guidelines. And so criminal background, you cannot have a criminal background. And then we talked about the labor and delivery nurse reviewing her past pregnancy records. And then we have a psychologist do the psychological evaluation, which is also an ASRM guideline that the fertility clinic is going to want to see that. So basically those 6 things, it takes the surrogates about 3 months to get through. But then once she passes that screening, now we know we have a great candidate to carry someone's baby.
Sure. American Surrogacy offers 2 distinct programs, the limited risk and the foundation program. Could you give me the key differences between the two?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the limited risk program is a program that offers financial protection to families. Unfortunately in this industry, there just could be some financial pitfalls that could happen along the way. This is where this program really protects you off of those financial pitfalls if we have to repeat services and repeat steps. It allows the fees to be very predictable and protected. The foundation program is as most agencies operate out there, where they just give you this large variable fee range and you a la carte every service that's needed along the way. You pay out of pocket as you go. And, that program is a great program too. In both of our programs, we work the case exactly the same. The only difference is how the money is allocated. One has financial protection and the other one doesn't. So in the foundation program, where the cost could creep up on the family is if we have any type of disruption for whatever reason and services and steps need to be redone to get that surrogate to the same spot.
So like for an example, let's say a surrogate that has become a match all of a sudden starts having some medical issues and they have to continue to get lab work and sonogram, whatever it is. That fee is going to be accrued by the intended parent, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, yes. So basically, the family is responsible for the medical screening at the IVF clinic. So the family pays the IVF clinic separately than American Surrogacy. So honestly, there's two professionals necessarily in this scenario is you have the IVF clinic and then you have the surrogacy agency. But yes, there's some scenarios like through prenatal care, those types of things where, based on what her insurance covers and doesn't cover, in the limited risk program, we cover the out-of-pocket prenatal expenses up to the cap of $5,000, whereas the foundation program, the family always comes out of pocket for every little thing that happens to them along the way that insurance didn't cover.
So out of curiosity, to become a surrogate, must you have your own personal private health care?
Yes, you
Insurance?
do. Yes, you do. That is an ASRM guideline as well. And that's why it's so important for us to review her health insurance to really see what it says about surrogacy. Because in some scenarios, it can have an exclusion to surrogacy, which means that we would have to go out and purchase her a surrogacy-friendly insurance plan. But you wouldn't know that unless you review her health insurance. But yeah, that's why we do the things we do.
So how often are you finding in surrogates that they are having pitfalls or issues with their private insurance?
I would say 25-30% of the time.
Okay.
It's not a huge number, but it definitely happens on a, not a regular basis,
Sure.
but a periodical basis.
Well, we all know insurance companies like
Yes.
to, not pay for
Ever
anything.
so changing.
Yeah.
Ever so changing. I could say something right now to you, and by the time we leave, it's different.
Yeah, the policies change.
Yes, the policies change.
Independent surrogacy can be a great option. Can you explain the benefits of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the independent program is, like I mentioned, it's when a family knows a surrogate or knows somebody that wants to be their surrogate. It could be a great situation for a family. Where you tend to save money on an independent program is, for example, let's say you had a sister or a cousin that wanted to be your surrogate, and maybe she wanted to do it for $0. So you save money on the base compensation that the surrogate gets, or maybe it's a lower base compensation. You also save money on marketing and advertising because you have used your own means to go out and locate that surrogate. So that's where a family can really keep the cost a little lower in an independent situation.
Sure.
Our independent program, it really is great on how we developed it. So basically how it works on our end is, let's just say, you have somebody that wants to be your surrogate. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is have her fill out that self-disclosed medical and social information forms. They send that to our office, and then our caseworkers are going to do a quick assessment of that. And we do this at no charge because right here, we're going to know pretty quickly if we're going to be following the ASRM guidelines or not. And so then we would give that assessment to all the surrogate and also the intended parents and see what they want to do. If they decided that everything looks good with that surrogate so far after that preliminary interview, then we do all the other initial screening pieces that we went over. And we do this at a one-time fee for families because some families are out there surfing the web, they're finding surrogates in social media, and sometimes that first surrogate gets denied very, very quickly. But our one-time fee will be valid no matter how many surrogates we have to screen before they're successful. Then the family has a choice to make. They can either decide to continue on with our agency and we can work that case all the way from start to finish, or the family can take that surrogate on their own and work it on their own. But it's very, very time consuming, and there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that most people will miss if they tried it on their own. And we do that for a case management fee. So we try to keep the cost down low on our end, so that way families keep the cost low on their end.
What kind of case management do you do in the independent program?
Yeah, good question. We do coordination with fertility clinics. We set up travel arrangements. We help correspondence with the attorneys and getting that all set up on our network of attorneys. We work with the outside monitoring clinic, medication schedules. There is a lot to it when you start looking at all the pieces of the puzzle it takes to have a successful journey.
Does the surrogacy company help with embryo creation, or who does?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, the surrogacy agency does not do the embryo creation or the embryo transfers. That would be the IVF fertility clinic that does that process. So really, you work with two programs. You work with the IVF fertility clinic, and then you work with an agency like us.
Does a family need their own embryos before talking to a surrogacy agency?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, how families should technically do it is as they make decisions on the fertility clinic, they want to be doing their due diligence with a surrogacy agency because the surrogacy agency is going to have their own process as well. The reality is, too, is families don't even have to have embryos created at the time that they join our agency. So we allow families to join with their embryos are created or without their embryos are created. However, it's important to know that we do not match families with surrogates until their embryos are created, because sometimes it takes families a little bit of time to do that. And if they're unsuccessful with creating that first set of embryos, then we're not having a surrogate technically sitting on the sideline waiting for them to do that. So we give the family the option at that stage.
What would be some tips in getting to know a surrogate?
Yeah, you will get to know your surrogate. Typically what happens in a case with us is after the intended parents and the surrogates had agreed upon each other and decided to take the next step in their journey, we do a Zoom call with the intended parents and the surrogate just to make sure everybody is still on board before we start working with the clinic. Then maybe when she's at the clinic doing medical screening, you'd like to take her out to eat lunch, meet with her, get to know her a little bit more. But during the journey, usually what happens is surrogates and intended parents will probably Zoom or FaceTime maybe once a week in the evenings or whenever it's convenient for them both. Maybe it's twice a week. Maybe it's after every doctor's appointment they want to do that. And honestly, the families if the families can go to as many doctor's appointments as they would like, what we see as cases move on is maybe the families would like to go to some of the bigger doctor's appointments, like the ultrasound or the sonogram, or even the delivery of the baby. But some of these prenatal visits are very short, they're very routine, they're uneventful. So what we see is families do a good job with the current technology to really bridge that distance gap. Because even if you had a surrogate that came from your own city, or maybe in your little neck of the woods, well, you're not going to always go over to her house and knock on her door and say hi to her all the time, because these women, they're raising other children. Some of them have careers, they're married, so they're very busy individuals. So we use that technology even if she's in your location versus 2 states away.
Well, and that's pretty amazing because, I've interviewed several surrogates, and one was very much like every appointment, she wanted to give them options. Is that required for an intended family to participate in those? Because sure. I would imagine that there might be some private moments, and without that strong bond or connection with that intended family, maybe the surrogate would have some trepidation around having people so involved in a very private area.
Sure. No, that makes sense. It's all about communication.
Yeah.
It really is, because every case is unique in their own way. This is why your caseworker is going to be so important, because they're going to help communicate what everybody's wishes is. And then as they get to know each other, you learn that they're communicating with each other. Sure. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's what makes you feel comfortable and the family feel comfortable. Because, maybe, for example, let's say the surrogate really liked her OBGYN on her last pregnancy, and maybe she wants to work with that OBGYN. Well, maybe the family is thinking about their own OBGYN. So again, it's communicating back and forth to make sure everybody's needs are met and the best decisions are met moving forward.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say is that communication is paramount. You have to communicate as the surrogate what you're comfortable with, what your level of inclusion and involvement is. I interviewed a surrogate where she wanted the intended parents there for the delivery.
Yeah.
And they were able to make that happen.
Absolutely.
But there may be a surrogate that says, this is a really private moment for me. I don't want a room full of people. And would that be acceptable?
Absolutely. Everything is acceptable
Okay.
in surrogacy. It really is. I mean, again, it's about communicating, making sure everybody feels good moving forward. If there's any type of potential tough conversations that need to happen, this is when you absolutely get your caseworker on board, because your caseworker is going to have a lot of good case management skills, and they're going to be able to work through all that and make sure everybody's happy moving forward.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of an example of a surrogate who says, I would love for the the wife or mother to be involved, but I really don't want the father in the delivery room, and that would be acceptable.
That would be acceptable. Everything is acceptable based on what everybody is looking for, what's important to them, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
It's really a wonderful thing. And also too, I mean, your relationship with the surrogate is going to be unlike any other relationship you have. And, because you are getting to know them in a 14 to 20 month time period. Because when you join our list, I mean, you'll be holding your baby in about 14 to 20 months. So that family's on that journey. The surrogate's probably been working with us for 3 months before that match. So she's in it for about 17 to 22 months. So everybody gets to know each other more than you think.
Right.
And as time goes by and the baby is born, it's unlike adoption where you're not required to send pictures and letters, for 18 years. But, you may want to send her a Mother's Day card once a year. Or, if you're ever in her area, maybe take her out to eat dinner or lunch. Or maybe you guys talk 2 to 3 times a year. It happens so many different ways, but there's just no requirements to it.
And interesting you say that, because the surrogates that I've spoken to have communication still to this day, years later after the baby has been born. And, of course, I was curious, how do you tell a 2-year-old that this is actually the person that carried you?
Right.
But, they're navigating those murky waters, and they really like each other.
Yeah, it does happen that way. It's a forever relationship,
Yeah.
really. I mean, it's unlike anything you'll ever have.
It's anti-surrogacy.
Yeah. And sometimes these surrogates, they had such a good situation with that family that they want to have another baby for
Yes.
the family. So you have those connections that are made, and it truly is just a wonderful, wonderful scenario from start to finish.
Yeah, because I actually have heard surrogates say that they were willing to carry a baby for the couple a couple years down the road. Mm-hmm. That's how strong the bond is and had become for the intended parents and the surrogate.
Yeah, we get a lot of repeat clients because obviously they have good experiences with us, but also that surrogate as well. And we do get a lot of clients back and forth, coming back to us for services because they had such a good experience before. So
well, and I think that just speaks to American Surrogacy and the level of customer service, if you want to call it that, and just such a detailed, descript way of serving both the intended parent and the surrogate.
Yeah, and having the sense of urgency is so important because, nobody, if you have a question as an intended parent or even a surrogate, it's so important to make sure that family or surrogate get their questions answered quickly. So that sense of urgency, is there at our agency, and we're just not out there ignoring people. We want to be a big part of the process as well.
So on that note, how is communication with your caseworker for a surrogate? Is that like a 24-hour thing? Is it within 24 hours you receive a call back? Like, what is that sense of urgency and communication?
A lot of times it's the same day. At the beginning of the process, usually communication and questions and all those things happen during the day. But as the surrogate becomes pregnant and starts to move along in her pregnancy, then we want to be available to her on the weekends and the evenings as well. So it becomes a little bit more of that 24/7 as the pregnancy starts. But getting to that point, a lot of stuff happens because, like I said, these women, they have children. A lot of them have careers, they're married. And so, they're very busy people. So maybe in the evenings, the only time that they can do certain things with emails. But then, we try to get back with them within 12 to 24 hours, obviously. And sometimes it's a lot faster than that based on what day of the week it is.
Well, that sounds like a very customer-focused, tailor-made process, which is really great.
Yes, I agree.
On average, what is the cost of IVF?
It ranges so much from clinic to clinic. I mean, you find that some clinics on the East and West Coast are a little bit more expensive than the Midwest. I say the national average out there is probably between 15 and 25,000. And if you need an egg donor or sperm donor, that's an additional cost on top of that. But that's about what you can expect at the clinic level.
And that's for one round, one harvesting. Explain that a little more.
Well, I'm not the clinic, so everybody does it a little differently. I would say there are some clinics that I've heard of out there that offer like packages. Maybe this costs for, so many different retrievals or so many different transfers. So it really is clinic specific. And that should be on your list of questions when you go and look for clinics on, do you offer packages? Do we just a la carte everything? And really get those pricing questions answered for you.
Well, and in speaking with numerous surrogates, all the injections, the preliminary, the things you have to do before you even receive the implant is quite daunting.
It's time consuming for sure. So the reality is when the family and the surrogate get into the official match with each other, until the actual embryo transfer, that takes about 4 months because you have to do that monitoring of the surrogate. You've got to start them on medications. Then you have to get the attorneys with the contract in place. And so there's some steps there that take a little bit of time. And again, the clinic availability should be a pretty high up question on your organized list because the slower the clinic, the longer it takes. So we have experience where if a clinic is really on top of it and they're very well staffed, they can really get through some of these things a lot faster than other clinics. So instead of that 4-month period, you have a 3-month period, and therefore you're holding your baby 1 month earlier.
Which is really the end goal here, right?
Yes,
That we get intended parents with that baby as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely.
On average, what is the cost of surrogacy?
Yeah, kind of like the clinics, what you'll find out there, the national average of the cost of surrogacy is ranging from about $100,000 all the way up to $300,000. Our two programs are on the mid to lower end of that range. And so you have to, as you do your research and your due diligence out there, you want to make sure that you have a budget good enough for the surrogacy agency on top of the IVF clinic as well.
Sure. And maybe if you, let's say, take the foundation program for any miscellaneous things that could come up. Like you really need to be prepared financially if you choose that said program for things that could come up.
Yeah, absolutely. The foundation program, it has a bigger fee range to it. So, setting a budget in that program is a little bit more difficult. But yes, you want to be financially prepared to go from start to finish in this program because, you're in a contract with this surrogate and she's getting compensated to carry your baby. And it's just one of those things that you just do not want to run out of money along the way.
Of course. Well, and just out of curiosity, what is the difference between adoption costs and surrogacy costs?
So adoption cost is different. It just depends because, the cost of adoption could be ranging, anywhere from maybe, $70,000 to $90,000. But it just depends, on her living expenses, attorney fees, those types of things. It kind of ranges that cost. And so it's less expensive in the adoption arena than it is the surrogacy. But again, it's a lot different in a lot of ways too.
Well, of course. And I think that that's important for our listeners to understand all their different options, whether they're starting IVF, what that's going to cost them. And then if they move to surrogacy or maybe they move to adoption, just purely from a financial standpoint.
Sure.
Here are your options. And some people may say this is the only path we have to getting a child.
Yeah, correct.
But it's amazing that American Surrogacy, American Adoptions offers all of that.
Yeah. We love building families here. But yeah, families, they're looking at both of those things. And, they probably maybe thought about adoption, but there's something about that genetic connection to the child that they're looking for. And that's what surrogacy has to offer. And even like embryo donation, which is, you're going out and getting embryos that have maybe been donated. Again, you have no genetic connection to that child, very much like adoption, but some families, it doesn't matter to them.
Interesting. What are some commonly used finance options for people looking into surrogacy?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, obviously. I think one of the biggest things is, first off, maybe walking into your local bank that you have a checking or savings account with, because you have a relationship with that bank, and they're going to be more apt to give you an unsecured loan at maybe one of the lowest interest rates out there. So that's how most families succeed. Other families, they may tap into their home equity because maybe that's also a low interest rate to pay that back. Some families tap into the retirement or 401k, again, somewhat of a lower interest rate to pay that back. Now, I do know that U.S. Bank had a family loan building program out there. So if you type in U.S. Bank, which is a huge bank, and you type in family building loan program, that's another avenue, but very much like your bank that you have a relationship with. But those are probably the top financing options that families choose.
Well, it's just kind of funny. Like, no one would ever think I'm going to finance having a baby, right? Like,
well, yeah. And, families ask me, they're like, Wade, do I have to lie to the bank? No, you don't have to lie to the bank. I mean, you can get a loan for a car, your vacation. Building your family is so important that you want to be proud of that. And you want to let your bank know that because they're going to be more apt to really care.
Right. Yeah. If anything to take a loan for, I would think this would be a
top priority.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So sometimes things are too good to be true. Have you found that these surrogacy companies that have no upfront fees are as good as they may seem?
Buyer beware out there, because, agencies that charge no upfront fees, what this really equals is, number one, the agency is unlikely doing any marketing and advertising to locate surrogates. And if they are, they're doing very, very little, which then reverts to their time of wait. Another thing with an agency with no upfront fees is they're likely not doing all the necessary screening on that surrogate to find that 2 out of 100, which then gets to the clinic level. They waste time and they waste money as that cycle repeats. So you find agencies not doing the necessary things up front to find good candidates to their families. Another thing too is that agency that you gave $0 to has no allegiance at all to you. You could think that you're on their list, they are thinking about you, you may never hear from them again. So with us, yes, we do have an upfront activation fee, but we also do a lot of services up front. We do marketing and advertising outreach. We do a tremendous amount of screening on our surrogates. And we have an allegiance to our families because they have done everything we've asked them to. They have signed our agency contract, and we have an allegiance to find that family a surrogate and provide that family services.
Speaking to several surrogates, that was one thing that really made a difference with them, with American Surrogacy, is just that really tailored, custom connection that they had with their caseworker and just the all-around experience.
Absolutely. These women are so fantastic. I mean, they're sweet. They're doing all this for certain reasons. They're very passionate about this. And yeah, before that surrogate really even sees a family's profile, we've been working with them for a while. They really get to know their caseworkers. And it really is just a great thing. It's a full circle.
It feels very family oriented, and I think that is really important. And this is a momentous decision on both parties to, partake in this
We get
adventure.
pictures all the time. I mean, it's just fantastic, especially when you see a family get to the end of their journey, they have their baby, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we keep in contact with both sides, the intended parents and surrogates, as time goes by too.
What an amazing job, Yeah. I mean, how beautiful to be able to experience and see this come to life, in a matter of 14 months. You're seeing people become parents. You're seeing someone it's just really a beautiful experience.
It's been very rewarding for me. Like I mentioned back in the adoption, where I worked the private adoptions at American Adoptions, building families over there has been great as well. It's just different on the surrogacy side. It takes longer technically. And so, you just really get to know wonderful people.
So I had recently heard on the news about a company called Seam. They were an escrow company that was used for surrogates and intended parents. And it was a little alarming to me because there was fraud. And can you tell me how American Surrogacy worked through that process and what happened?
Yeah, so Seam, definitely, it was really tragic to the surrogates and families that this happened to them, detrimental. Seam, located in Houston. The owner of Seam was doing this for many, many years. She was probably working with so many different types of agencies and probably had anywhere from like 500 to 1,000 families caught up in this escrow scenario. And really what happened is over the years, she was starting other ventures and she was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And, it just ended up being embezzlement. And so it just exploded on her. And, she wasn't communicating to clients. Her bank accounts were frozen. And out of those 500 to 1,000 families, American Surrogacy, we had 30 families caught up in this. And so we've had many, many discussions. And, I think we're the only agency, but we cared about our surrogates. We cared about our intended parents. So moving forward, we made the agency decision to take on that financial burden to get these surrogates and intended parents to the finish line without anybody coming out of pocket moving forward. And I don't know of another agency that did that. But there were literally probably $10 to $15 million in this escrow through all the families. And it was just horrible for those families and surrogates.
Well, I think of the surrogates, situation. Imagine being 6 months pregnant and you're supposed to get this monthly compensation and all of a sudden you're not getting any of that money. And it's like those poor women were just up a creek.
Yeah, they were.
And the fact that American Surrogacy stepped up and paid them anyway, essentially out of your own pocket. That money came from the company of American Surrogacy is just really remarkable. And I feel like it really sets you apart from every other agency that didn't participate in doing the same.
Oh my gosh, yes. And the lawsuits are coming out there. Who knows who's suing who? Who knows if Seam is ever going to pay anything back? I mean, we're not expecting to get paid back from Seam and their stuff. But yeah, it was important for us. We had many, many meetings as a team on what was the best way to handle this. And we felt like this was the only choice that we had as an agency because we're in it to provide services for a long, long time. And we just didn't want to get caught up with our surrogates not getting their base compensation. And really families not, if you're a family and you've spent most of your money on your surrogacy journey and now all of a sudden you got to come up with $60,000 more, I wouldn't even know what to do. And so it created a lot of less stress for our families and surrogates knowing that we had them, we were behind them all the way.
Well, and to me, what I'm hearing and what I've witnessed is that this really is family and that the customer is really your primary focus and giving that tailored experience. And I just think it's remarkable.
Oh my gosh. If you look at our staff, we just have so many staff members that have longevity here. And, it's just a lot of education they have, a lot of wisdom they have. And, we all work in the office and, we all have meetings. And so we're just constantly talking and making sure we're doing good case management and asking questions. And so we feel like we're always on the same page, as we work these cases along the way.
Amazing. What is the length of time to complete a journey, not just a match?
Once the family officially joins our list and their embryos are created, I would say planning purposes, 14 to 20 months.
Amazing. So in today's day and age, do you have to work with a local surrogate or agency?
No, not at all. It's 2025, and with how great technology is nowadays, you really can bridge that distance gap being in 2 different locations. In fact, let's just say you're a family from Minnesota and the agency that you really like has come from Kansas City. Well, it's not uncommon to work with an out-of-state agency and an out-of-state surrogate, because it's not the location that's important, it's the quality of the surrogate and the quality of the agency that is important.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Wade, for joining us. Your insight and information around this will be so helpful to potential intended parents and or surrogates. So I really want to thank you again.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I'd be happy to come back anytime.
I would love to have you.
Okay.
If you liked this episode, please like and subscribe for more surrogacy-related content.